Welcome to Double Wings. Last time we talked about different forms of government. Essentially, the idea was different forms of rule of law. Today, we're going to talk about democracy. For those who pay attention to politics, you may notice that people tend to focus on one or the other. The Democrats like to talk about democracy. One person, one vote. The Republicans like to talk about rule of law. I remember Bill Maher has talked about abolishing the Senate and the Electoral College on the basis that they are not compatible with democracy. He's right in one aspect, because democracy and the rule of the law are not compatible in many cases. So what is democracy? Essentially, it's one person, one vote, right? So democracy represents the will of majority, which is a good thing. But what about a minority? I thought SJWs were all about the minority. The Constitution, or the rule of the law, is the best protection we have for the minority. Throughout history, we have witnessed that democracy without the rule of the law has caused much evil. From the very beginning, when democracy evolved from the city-state of Athens, the great philosopher Socrates vehemently opposed it. He thinks the Athenian democracy is pretty much mob rule. And he tried his best to convince people. Of course, he wasn't very popular, and the citizens of Athens voted to banish him. That was a democratic decision. Of course, Socrates, being Socrates, refused to leave. Like a tragic Greek hero, drank his poison and died. So it's not far-fetched to say that democracy killed Socrates. Now let's bring history closer to us. After the French Revolution, Robespierre came to power and ushered in another episode of democracy without the rule of the law. And we all know how that ended. The entire French elite was pretty much murdered. So one cannot blame the English for looking down on the French, because in the eyes of an English gentleman, the French is a bunch of peasants. What kind of nation kills off its most educated section of the population? And of course, the communists in China came to power partly due to democracy as well. Although there was no actual election took place, the everyday folk at the time did support the communists. I remember I met up with a friend's ex-wife a few years ago, and she told me she was a Maoist. I was very shocked. Why would a European woman be a fan of a big monster like Mao? And her words were, Mao freed up the masses, or Mao achieved true democracy. Aside from her ignorance of the Cultural Revolution in China, what Mao did was he unleashed a huge section of ignorant mob in order to defeat his political adversaries. From all these anecdotes, one can see that the average Joe does not have that much power of critical thinking. He's highly susceptible to brainwashing. So democracy is highly susceptible of being hijacked by some evil grandmaster behind the scene. Look at today's America. I understand why Trump is so concerned about the southern border, because the folks from these poor countries, they probably would not have much prospect of getting high-paying jobs, so welfare would bloom, and the size of the government will also bloat, where individual liberty will be considered irrelevant compared to the collective good. And these new immigrants will almost certain to vote for a party who will perpetuate this welfare state. And folks with traditional conservative values will never be able to vote into power through a one-person, one-vote system. When I was younger, I used to be puzzled by why those billionaires would support a leftist party whose goal is to tax the rich. So these billionaires would be the first victims. Now I can see they're playing a bigger game. Those politicians on the stage are just their pawns. When a democracy is not able to vote out the politicians of one brand, then these politicians' master behind the scene will have the power to rule the nation and then the world for good. I hope people will heed this warning. A democracy without a rule of law is dangerous. And when you have the rule of the law, democracy is guaranteed. Thank you.